It's another way of reading.
Fascinating. Fascinating. Thank you.
Danny first, then.
Go ahead, Danny.
Thank you for all the insights. I have just three small bits to pick.
Just
El Kovata. Now, I think the biblical author has many more scruples than the rabbis and your presentation. In other words, the biblical author does not want to say where exactly the piercing was done. Okay? And therefore, it has a play in words. He goes to Kuba, and then he pierces her the Kovata. So I'm just saying is that it's not so clear cut that he does what the Midrash says in terms of piercing through the sexual organs. The second thing was in terms of Numbers being the end of theocracy. I think that the rebels there are just as interested in theocracy as Moses is, because Korach says Kolam Kadoshim, and Miriam and Aaron say Hayim Rak Hashem, Moshe Diber Hashem. So they're not questioning whether or not there should be a theocracy. They're questioning who should be the interpreter of God, who has the right to enforce the theocracy. Because after all, God doesn't use, except when he causes plagues and other things, he doesn't enforce it by himself. And the third thing was in terms of the image of Balaam. In Balak itself, in that parsha, in that chapter, he comes out, as you said, as a neutral character. And then you said the rabbis, he turns into a very anti-Moses, he turns into anti-Abraham, etc. But I think you can find other places already in the Bible. In Matot, a couple chapters later, he's murdered in the wars of the Midian. And then I think it's Hosea who says, remember what Balaam came in and tried to do. And it's an interesting parallel, I think, with what happens with Esau, where in the original Esau story, I think it's sympathetic. I think that he gets a raw deal. But then the rest of the Bible does its best to demonize him. And then when he gets to the rabbis, he's obviously is the archetype of the demon. And therefore, you also have the relations between Balaam and Esau. Both are identified with Jesus, and both are part of Rome and the enemy. So anyway, those are
no, all good points, and of course the in whatever the case is, kovata is a difficult word. That's clear. The power of my suggestion, as I understand it, is that it creates the semiotic consonants that enables to understand what's happening in the episode, its power and its limits also. Remember, that's also Moses says, so this is a trope throughout, that Moses agrees with that. Moses does not want to claim, I have, I'm the only one here. But I think, but I think that transition is between Numbers and Deuteronomy. I think Deuteronomy is structured different, and it also reflects, for example, the move that you have in Samuel from being the lead judge to being a court prophet, which I think is also what happens in the move between Numbers and Deuteronomy with regard not only to political structure, but with regard to the stance of the prophet. So I see it as the move happening already in the Torah itself, the reflection itself.
But in Numbers also, when Moses asked for God to appoint a successor, he's also, it's the same structure of the one person who's legitimate successor or the legitimate interpreter of God's will.
Right, but also using very monarchic terms, asher yetzeh lifneim v'asher yavo lifneim, which is exactly what the people ask for in 1 Samuel 8. There's the focal point, but the crucial question will, of course, be the question of dynasty. And here, I think that two things we can see beautifully: that Moses doesn't fall into the trap of appointing his sons, which Samuel will do, and of course is ironically tragic play on Eli's sons, which put Samuel into his position from the very beginning. So actually here Moses is actually, his integrity is retained in the story, which Samuel doesn't retain. Secondly, is that Moses is never adopted in the Bible as a model. And even the rabbis' understanding of Moshe in the Agadah, in their Agadah generally, is a very complex one. Whereas Maimonides clearly builds up Moses as a model figure, this is by no means the rabbinic position with regard to Moses. I think that this also has to be taken into account.
So for Maimonides, the model can't be imitated. Can't be imitated.
Correct. God can be imitated, but not the model. What's your name?
Michael.
Michael.
You may not want to, this may be outside of what you thought of talking about today, but I was doing study of the Psalms, which talks about the history as opposed to the Torah. In other words, there seems to be a kind of a dialogue, and Psalms has quite a different view on a lot of.
We have Psalms that don't have the Sinaitic moment in them.
Yes, or there's only 7 commandments, not 10. I mean, there are all different kinds of changes. And in this particular case, I was fascinated by Psalm 106, Vayamod Pinchas Vayifalel. He doesn't kill anybody. He prays, right? If that's what Ifalel means.
If that's what, exactly.
Yeah, but it's my best guess, really. But it certainly doesn't say anything about taking a spear and killing anyone. Vatachashev lo litzdaka, instead of brit, right? L'dor v'dor ad olam, right? So this is a whole different kind of understanding of the moment,
right?
And I've looked. Believe me, I've searched the rabbinic midrash. Very few midrashim bring that verse in and compare it. There are a few, right? And they usually bring it in to say, well, we've got another version. I mean, that's about all it says, like davar acher. But I was wondering if you thought there was. Because to say that within the Bible, the kind of the rabbinic demur from building up Pinchas as a model, as a figure that people should follow, already exists in the biblical tradition.
Yeah,
that's what I'm asking.
I think that's a fascinating question. I haven't thought about it. I haven't thought about it sufficiently, because really what I was after here was I'm trying to understand the mechanics.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to get at. What Foucault likes to use the word technology. I think that's a bit overblown, but the techniques. How is this created? How does this work? How do these structures work? The verse in Psalms 106 echoes beautifully also the Abrahamic verse, "Ve'emin b'Adonai v'chashvea lo tzedakah." And these are verses that are today so difficult to read because of Paul's midrash in Romans. None of us are naive with regard to this verse. We don't know what to do with it. What does it mean to be justified? If that's the meaning of tzedakah,
right? It's definitely one of the meanings.
One of the meanings, yeah. This is a real. This is tough. This is tough because we're enmeshed in these traditions. Medieval Jewish moments are no less created by foundational dialogue with Islam than Christianity, than their own inner traditions, and it's very difficult to decipher. I don't know. I don't know. Even here I feel like I'm treading on a minefield. Trying to move, and to play with it, and
right.
very hopefully delicately. I don't know.
Thank you.
I want to bring this back to the issue of violence, which is the core issue that we're handling this year, and the question of religious violence. So, what I was interested by in what you said is that basically the act of Pinchas stands as a counteract to, you were suggesting the sexual act that is performed. But if we go back to the larger picture in Balaam is non-violent. Balaam stands out for Balak's understanding that the only way to battle these people is not through violence, but rather through prophecy, interacting with the divine, bringing in something else to the conversation or the confrontation that is non-violent. Because I would suggest maybe Balaam was looking at the issue of Amalek, where suddenly this whole issue, or to the conquests that are very, you look at what is going on the Transjordan side, and Balaam and Balak realize that confronting these people on the battlefield using traditional violence is not going to work. We're going to have to work our way around it. Mm-hmm. And along comes Pinchas and draws violence back into the picture, right?
Yep.
By performing a very, very violent act. So within that kind of discourse, I was wondering what you were thinking.
That's an amazing question, Effie, because it's. Think about it in terms of the Abrahamic religions, and I want to emphasize Abrahamic because there definitely is a competition on understanding who's Abraham's students,
right.
and I think the rabbis are correct in understanding that the Pheneas story comes about because Balaam didn't succeed. It became necessary because there was no other way to confront them.
Of course, Balaam comes from where Abraham comes.
Oh yes, this is very complex, and this is one of the most troublesome inheritances we have, because all three of these Western religions are operating with these kind of motivations act as possible sources, ongoing possible sources of religious energy in them. It's there constantly. That's why we have to try to see how this is done. What is it sublimated? How is it sublimated? What kind of other courses are open to us? Are we always going to fall into this moment of default within them? I don't know. It's but if we begin by creating a structure for reflection on this very fact, I think we've already done a first step on the way.
I think that maybe what you named the zealot moment should be understood also within the controversy of post-World War I about state of exception and pure power in Benjamin's critical violence and Schmidt's political theology. And I think that it might be useful to juxtapose Pinchas with other transgressions, such as Tamar, where what you picture here is a way in which the zealot moment is included within the legal discourse, but not within law itself, as another tool of the political order to confirm itself. But Tamar, in the Zohar, for example, is taken as the mother of the Messiah. So it's put not within the legal discourse, but in another space.
Right, Aviram, I think that's a crucial question. I think that the Zoharic rendering is correct. That is that you have the Davidic myths of that the source of the Redeemer is in incestual transgression. This is true of the Moabite story. It's true of the Tamar story. And one of the questions is why? And I think that what's standing behind it is that the messianic figure cannot be a redemptive figure if he doesn't know sin. You can only redeem if you come from sin. Now, if that's the myth, then the myth of incestual transgression of the Davidic dynasty is a counter myth to the Pheneas myth, which is a priestly foundational story. And the moment the techniques of redemption from sin are done very, very differently. Now, I think that they're deeply intertwined in the tradition, namely because the Davidic dynasty takes the Zadokites and creates them as its priests. It also creates Jerusalem as a cultic moment, and yet, if you look at the Bible, it's in its canonical renderings. The Bible never gives up on the local cult. The Akedah, Bet El, all these Machanaim, Pniel, all the places are retained completely in their power, and the Torah never mentions Yerushalayim except for Makitzedek Melech Shalem. If that's the way we're to understand Melech Shalem. So now why am I saying this? I'm saying this is because, again, I think that we have to be very careful of deciphering the mythic moments of the cults in the Torah by reading them through the picture of the centralization of ritual in Jerusalem as a temple, and which doesn't appear in the Torah. So we have even the book of Deuteronomy is very, very careful and will use only the term hamakom. Now, which in itself is a fascinating term. There's a lot to say about that. Of what is hamakom? Hamakom is the place of the event, is where one encounters the divine, and so I think that we have to be very careful about calibrating the different myths and understanding how they're operating, because definitely in Rabbinic Judaism we already have a much more inclusive reading that tends to make them all part of one picture of what might be much more competitive models of whose redemptive and salvational power are not sufficiently clear.
I think the main point of this competitive structure is that Tamar's transgression is the transgression of the oppressed.
Of the
oppressed.
Of the oppressed. Yeah. And so is Ruth.
Yeah.
So is Ruth. So is Ruth. Yes, but that is consonant with the Jacob story, because interestingly, if we're talking about myth, about mythos and nomos in Genesis, a major trope of the mythos of Genesis is that the law of primogeniture is wrong. It's binding, but it's wrong. And that's an extremely powerful moment in Genesis. So we've got a lot to think about here, about these structures and how they keep on working. One of the best places to look is you look in the Zohar. Read the Sabbatean materials on the self-understanding of the Messiah, and you'll see how easy it is to revive these texts. For example, now there's a wonderful text that was done about Sarah, the daughter of Shabtai Tzvi. Look at what's operative there. It all becomes alive again. It's just there to be used. You just need someone to activate them, and they're whoop. They pop up, and you can do whatever you want with them. It's amazing. Your name, please? Chana.
Fascinating.
Thank you.
I would like to take us to the other Kanai.
To the other?
To the other Kanai. Next to Eliyahu.
Her buddy, Elijah.
My good friend. So there's something to say about every point, but what I would like to get at is how Pheneas is said, he's promised, forever for
That Pheneas is.
Yeah, but he gets absorbed into Elijah, and the quintessential Kanai becomes only Elijah after a certain point. All of the traditions about he absorbs him into him from the priestly side, from the Kanai side, from all kinds of different directions, and it's the figure of Eliyahu who continues to be present, Lil Man. And I think that thinking from today, one of the possibilities is because he is inside and outside in his
I would agree with you.
And one of the moments that ties,
which is not the case with Pheneas.
It's not. He's mortal. But Elijah kind of absorbs Pheneas into him and transcends time and place.
Correct.
And he's acting, Carmel, he's acting without the, outside of the halachic structure that will develop, whatever, but he's also, it's to save the structure itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it comes out in Elijah being at circumcisions, because there you have all these elements and an expression of them with the blood, with a baby boy, with thinking about redemption, thinking about everything, but it's connected to, it's an ordered ritual, very central, very organized, but it's a moment of being able to reflect and say, we cannot be zealots in Kiddush Hashem. We do not have that moment where we can get up and decide that we are acting violently out of any kind of to a chosen God, but putting it into that energy and possibility into a very ordered ritual.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think that this is a direction we have to go in. We must look at Elijah as another layer of development of this.
I forgot to say this is very much in Ashkenaz Middle Ages, which is my focus, and I forget to say that.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Now, I just want to say that when you look at the Elijah story, you can see that the rabbis are not coming out of nowhere in their very guarded reaction here to Pheneas. First of all, remember that the very fact that one of Eli's sons is called Pinchas, and he's described as with his brother Chofni vayishkevu et hanashim habaot levet Hashem is already more than ironic. Okay, that's blasphemous almost. Now, Elijah is interesting because Elijah is pronouncedly liminal. He has no pretension of being within the human order, and you see this beautifully about the king's servant who says to him, "Listen, why are you doing this to me? Why are you showing up? Because I know that you're going to disappear in another couple of moments, and then I have to face my king." Okay, and Elijah says to him, "Okay, don't worry. You'll be okay. I'm going to keep my eye on you, even though I disappear." He's in and out constantly. So you have the Hanoch story operating in him. You have the Pheneas story, but he's not a priest, and he is not founding the cult, although he's confronting the Canaanite cult. Mm-hmm. So you have a very complex story, and I'm putting aside other appearances of Elijah in the Bible. You have very similar thematics here, but constructed differently from a prophetic and not a priestly point of view. And I think that this is one of the powers of prophecy, and also it's done vis-a-vis not the Jerusalem temple. It's done vis-a-vis the Israelite cult. That is to say, Bethel and Dan and Beersheba, not Yerushalayim. So now look how the rabbis, they don't want us to think about that. So we're dealing with the question of Hora'at Shah or not Hora'at Shah, which doesn't interest him at all. His whole life is in the Hora'at Shah. He's never within the law. So Elijah is a very, very complex figure, and it's another way of looking at these problems. I agree completely. Yeah. Your name?
Davidi.
Davidi.
Maybe I'm a bit out of order, but I want to go back. Yeah.
How can it be out of order? We're not in the order. I mean, anything but that.
I want to try and go back to the question of violence and the legitimacy of violence. And during your reading, which was eye-opening, I thought about maybe a more cynical reading of this text. As you said about, we know his family tree is the grandkid of Aaron, Pheneas, and he has the power of his family. And then when you said about Moses crying, is because marrying or having acquaintance with a Gentile, not the sense, Gentile, a non-Israelite, is the weak point of Moses. And we know from Numbers 12 that Aaron is talking about Moses. Right. Aaron, the grandfather of Pheneas, is talking about Moses' weak point by marrying the Medianite woman. So we can think about the violence of, like when I think of violence and the legitimacy of violence, like talking in Weberian terms, so we can think about violence as the practice of the hegemony, the state, or of the way of the weakened people to get into the order by breaking it. So we can, I'm thinking, is Pheneas is part of the order? Is his violence, that is violence, is a part of a political game or political clash between Moses and Aaron? Or it's pure, and maybe the answer of God, is the answer for my question, but maybe his violence is not, can answer us, can give us an answer about the legitimacy of violence. Is he going out of order? Maybe he's a part of the order.
I think I tend to see it as part of the order, but within the biblical narrative of Numbers, as displaying the dysfunctionality of the Mosaic order. It's the moment when the state stops functioning that the Pheneases are try to take the reins in their hands. That's how I understand what Numbers is telling us. That's the point of view of the book of Numbers, which is not necessarily the best phenomenology of the myth itself, but I think that that's the placing of the myth in the larger story as I understand it. And remember that when Joshua is appointed, Moses says, "V'lifnei Elazar ya'amod." He's very careful about his grandnephew there. This is he knows what he knows what he's dealing with. So I think it's worthwhile thinking about it that way. But these are enigmatic texts. They
Last question.
It's actually common, because since your theme is violence, and I think there could be also another counter read. It may have been said. I apologize because I had to run to the bathroom. But if there may be a counter story. First of all, there's a very well-known midrash about Bad Yiftach, that it could have been averted, but both Yiftach stood on his high horse, and so did Pinchas, and so that's very well known. But there's also, even within this text, Pinchas perceives that there's a gap, and Vayakam, gets up. What's wrong with the fact that Hema Bochim? There's nothing wrong with that. In other words, if you think about it, Moses and the they're sitting there and they're crying. Sometimes uncertainty is not so terrible. In other words, you don't know what has to be done, and perhaps staying in a situation of Bochim, we like to have certainty. We want to have leaders who tell us what to do, but sometimes it's not so. Okay, now I have something to substantiate that, because I very often when I'm teaching, I look at Menachem Bet. 1 second, I looked it up before because I wanted to get the right. In Menachem Bet, it's where is it? Menachem Bet Vav, chapter 6, where you have the two women who want to eat their children, and what is the reaction of the king? He just tears his clothing because he doesn't know what to do. It's such a terrible situation. Whether it's his fault or not, we don't know, but it's a terrible situation, which is in contrast to Solomon, who knows exactly what to do when he says, cut off, the children, and what if he was wrong, by the way? What if they would say, when he was playing chicken, what if they would have actually said, go ahead and do it? Right? So I think you could have a counter thing where perhaps Bochim is not so terrible. We're mourning, we're in a terrible situation, we don't know what to do about it. And so there is no leader. Maybe we have to wait for the right leader and not have the one who comes in with the sword to solve everything. I mean, I'm just throwing this out as a possibility, since you're talking about violence in general.
It is a possibility. I tend to read, as I suggested also with the Numbers narratives. I think that when the Torah describes Moses as being the most humble person on the earth, it's very good for a person. It's very bad for a leader. That's not what you want from him. That's not what you want from him. And so I think that's. So I put it in that context, but it's completely. These are very fluid texts. It's we're going to reconstruct a narrative, and we say we ask what hermeneutic capital do we get from our different interpretive moves. That's it. We got to put them on the table. That's the best we can do. This is who he is. He is now carrying this priestly tradition. He is now going to enact the very meaning of priesthood. Vayakam mitoch ha'edah, and he stood up. He left the assembly. Terrible translation, I think. Vayakam means he postured himself. Now, I just want to point out to you, one of the most beautiful places to look at rabbinic tradition. What?
Has the overtone of attack.
It has the overtone of attack and the overtone of erection. He erects himself. He stands himself, right? He stands up. Now, interestingly, Nekama, I think that would be a bit strong, but I want to point out, interestingly, that when you turn to foundational texts of what today we call them Jewish mysticism. When you look at the story of Elazar ben Arach and Yochanan ben Zakkai at Tosefta Megillah chapter 2 in Ein Dorshin, right? Yochanan ben Zakkai is riding his ass, and Elazar ben Arach, his student, is leading him, and he turns to his teacher and he says to him, "Master, Rabbi, Lamdeni perek b'merkava. Teach me a chapter of the chariot." And Ben Zakkai turns to him and says, "Don't you know that that you don't even teach this to one. Only to someone who is wise and understands this of himself, that is someone who you don't have to teach. So what Elazar ben Arach does is that he begins to expound the Merkava to his teacher, right? Hu martze, which we use, unfortunately, that we use the verb today to lecture. But martze means like a money changer, shulchani shemartze et ma'otav. He shows it's the student who displays his expounding to the teacher, right? And then Yochanan ben Zakkai says, oh, he knows what he's talking about. He gets off the ass and covers himself. And what happens is, not in the Tosefta, but in the rendering of the Talmuds, the vision is suddenly before their eyes. They see the chariot. On this, the Tosefta says, actually Yochanan ben Zakkai says this on his teacher, on his student, Na'eh doresh v'na'eh mekayem. What does that mean? That his midrashic expounding erects the picture before our eyes. It becomes a reality. Vayakam is a very powerful verb in this tradition. And when Pinchas is creating a new reality, Vayakam means to enter and to create a new reality. There's a new ontology being created in the story, and we're being led to it. Maze Vayakam. Actually, that, I just want to say that meaning of Tosefta Chagiga was suggested by Yuda Libes in his wonderful little book Cheto Shel Elisha on Elisha's sin. Okay, so he didn't merely leave the assembly, he stood up. He stood up. And what does he do? Vayikach romach biyado, and taking a spear in his hand, Vayavo achar ish Yisrael el hakuba. Now here the translation is, he followed the Israelite into the chamber. But this is a complete missing of the story. Remember that the verb vayavo means to copulate. And what Pinchas is doing, I would suggest, is an anti-ritual to the anti-ritual. While
the spear,
Zimri, of course, the spear is the phallic instrument. And what does he do? ויבוא אחר איש ישראל אל הקובה וידקור את שניהם, את איש ישראל ואת האישה אל קובתה ותעצר המגפה. He followed the Israelite into the chamber and stabbed both of them, the Israelite and the woman, through the belly. Rather than through the belly, I would say through their genitals. That's what the story's about. He is redeeming the sexual anti-ritual by his own sexual anti-act with the spear. That's why Vayakam is so important. He is erecting a different story and a different reality. And he redeems through a undoing of the ritualistic moment of the Israelite man and the Midianite woman. This is what gives it also its atoning power from his point of view, because it's a complete undoing. And yet, and suddenly the divine plague ends against Israel. Now, we haven't even heard that it began, but it ended. Okay, which means that the divine wrath was already there. And 24,000 people died. Now, interestingly, the Bavli, who will read immediately, I can't go into the entire Bavli. I'm going to go look at the halachic aspect. But the Bavli suggests that the 24,000 is that the Israelite man copulated 24,000 times with the Midianite woman. Now, the question of the fantasy is fascinating in and of itself. But the point about it is you see how the rabbis are completely attuned to the text and how unnerving this moment is. It's the moment where everyone, look, as the rabbi says, Tashash kocho shel Moshe. Moses suddenly became impotent. He lost his potency, he lost his power. He falls down and he cries. But Pheneas, in all senses of the word, rises to the moment. Now, interestingly, the next episode, Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, and the Lord said to Moses as follows, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron הכהן השיב את חמתי מעל בני ישראל בקנאו את קנאתי בתוכם ולא כיליתי את בני ישראל בקנאתי. Here we get another layer on the story, which is a reflection already on the story, right? The Lord spoke to Moses saying, Pheneas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, the priest, has turned back my wrath from the Israelites by displaying among them his passion for me, so that I did not wipe out the Israelite people in my passion. Now here again, isn't terrible. I'm sorry to say this publicly. This misses the point, because the whole power of this, this is a rare biblical verse where you have the lead root appear 3 times in the same verse. Kano, kano, kano. And the whole question is, what is the meaning of kano here? Should we translate it zealotry? Should we translate it wrath, zeal, passion? What is being said here is completely unclear. But what does God do? God says, I wanted to destroy them, and he displayed a moment of zealotry. Now, interesting, there's none of this is mentioned this way in the episode itself. We don't exactly know within the episode what is it that is motivating Pheneas. But this text already, as let's say the first reception moment of the previous story, is already coloring it through a crucial verb, kuf nun aleph, kano. And this will be a marker. This is a marker because the zealot moment in these traditions is a crucial one. What the human being is taking into his hands at this moment is the real question. And here, in this verb, the point is that the human being reenacted or enacted the divine wrath by himself. He became God's hand. He posited himself as the divine hand to act. And that's why God is relieved of his anger, because someone has done it for him. So it's not a mere atonement, it's actually an enacting out of the divine motivation itself according to this first reflection upon it. And then comes another curious verse, Lachen. Lachen? Why Lachen? Lachen emor, hineni noten lo et briti shalom. Therefore, say therefore, I grant him my pact of friendship or of peace. What is this? Why therefore? And why this? I think it's safe to say that the reason is because Pheneas is no less exposed at this moment than anybody else. But interestingly, I think here we must also at least allow two more motives to surface and to think about them when we try to reflect upon this episode from the biblical point of view. One of them is to remember how crucial in the Israelite cult to this very day is blood. Blood is a major semiotic signifier in this ritualistic tradition. It goes back to the Paschal moment. It's there all the time. Blood is a marker. It's actually quite, I would say, unnerving to see how powerful blood is a marker in Jewish, Israeli, and Palestinian societies to this very day. Think about that picture of the lynch of Israeli soldiers in Ramallah, where the young Palestinian who has killed them puts his hands full of blood at the window. This is for him a Pheneas moment. This is the displaying of the blood. Displaying of blood is something very crucial in these traditions. And let's not say, I was just in, I was in Antwerp last week, and now that I'm dealing a lot with these questions, I went to the cathedral in Antwerp, and I walked out after 2 minutes. I said, I can't take this any longer. I can't see these. I can't see the rituals of blood. They are so foundational. But against this background, it's interesting that there's a completely other priestly model. The other priestly model is the Ktoret, is the incense, which is smell. And remember that is what Aaron does. When Aaron says, previously, in the book of Numbers, he stands between the live and the dead with the incense that calms down God. There are two models. Actually, they're very deeply intertwined in the sacrificial moment, because in the sacrificial moment, you have a spilling of blood on the one hand, but you have the smell of the meat going up on the other hand. What exactly the relationship between them is very complex here. And then the meat itself. It's reenacted also in Shchitat Chulin. There are many different things here that have to be discussed, which I won't go into. But I do want to stress that within the priestly tradition, there is a tradition of smell and not of blood. And that's the importance of the Aaron story. Because in the Aaron story, the incense achieves the atonement without spilling of blood.
Moses by speech.
Moses by speech is interesting. Point well taken. I want to think more about that. Point well taken. Point well taken. And sometimes also the failure of his speech. Right. Good point. Good point. Now, and then God promises him, "Vayta lo ulzaro acharav brit olam tachat asher kinel Elohav v'chaper al bnei Israel." And it will be unto Pheneas, and for his descendants after him, a pact of priesthood for all time, because he took, or he acted zealously for his God, thus making expiation for the Israelites. Now, I think that in the Pheneas episode, we see also the passion that guides the zealot, but I think that one of the deep, perhaps, gaps between the story itself and the reflection upon the story is that in the story itself, it's not clear what the narrator thinks about Pheneas. And the reason I say this is because at the end of the day, Pheneas is completely enmeshed in the semiotics created by the anti-ritual. His action has meaning as as a redeeming ritual only against the background of the anti-ritual. That's the meaning in which, if we would want to use medieval language, for the narrator of the story, at the end of the day, Pheneas is profoundly idolatrous. His ritual act is only within the horizon created by the anti-ritual. It gains its meaning only there. That could also explain the importance of the reflection that comes afterwards, because it must be redeemed. Now, this will be a constant trope in Rabbinic Agadah. Think about the legend in Tractate Yoma about the line of fire that comes out of the Holy of the Holies, as a moment in which the Second Temple is marked as an attempt to release the temple from its idolatrous mooring. Whether it's successful or not is a different question. But that is, I think we have to read it against this background, and the question of what kind of semiotic structure makes the priestly moment possible and necessary. Here, the sexual and the violent are deeply intertwined. As a phallic moment of both sexuality and redeeming from sexuality, as a moment of slaughter. This has to be, we have to say more about this. This is about as far as I'll go with this. Then we come to the rabbinic story in Tractate Sanhedrin. Are we still good with time? We're cool? So let's say at least a few things about that. First of all, where is it placed in Tractate Sanhedrin, which is interesting in and of itself. The Mishnah says, Haboel Aramit Kanaim Pogim bo. Someone who has relationships, a relationship or copulates with, now, Aramit is an Aramaic woman. It could be a euphemism for a Gentile woman. Highly unclear. This is not a word that appears throughout the Mishnah. Zealots can attack him. Kanaim pogim bo. Now this is an interesting Mishnah, because what it teaches us that if indeed it is a euphemism for a Gentile woman, it means that the Mishnah doesn't think that a Gentile woman or having relationships with a Gentile woman is forbidden by law. Because if it would be forbidden by law, it would be punishable. And the high moment of zealotry becomes the moment of having a relationship with a Gentile woman. So first of all, you see what a long path the story of Numbers has taken all the way to the Mishnah. Daniel.
Divine death is also not actionable, but you can't say things which are punished by divine death are allowed.
How many things do you have in the Mishnah norms that are punishable by mitabi de shamayim? The answer is that there are almost none. Which is not the case with regard to the Tosefta. This might be a deep argument between the Mishnah and Tosefta across the board. Across the board. I think Yair has written about it, but we certainly discussed it. I remember discussing it with him. But the Mishnah doesn't have that category. It will become a very important category afterwards. But interestingly, here in this case, and also in its placing in Mishnah Sanhedrin, it has to do with unactionable transgressions. Definitely. However, it's not clear what the transgression is. For example, let's take Maimonides, who turns this into a negative commandment. Maimonides thinks there's a negative commandment of having sexual relations with a non-Jewish woman. But this is not clear that this is the rabbinic position before him. This might well be a innovation by Maimonides. Interestingly, chapter 13, halakha 1 of, if I remember correctly, of the laws of forbidden intercourse, which also colors, and this is what you dealt with extensively, with the his understanding of what conversion is about. Because for Maimonides, conversion becomes the ability to marry someone who is not Jewish, and actually forbidden by according to him, by a negative commandment. So this is an interesting thing, but this might be a Maimonidean position. It's not clear that this is the Mishnah. Okay, so here is another case where we have to be very careful between where the Mishnah is, where the Tosefta is, where the Bavli is, where the Rishonim are. We got to listen into it. But that's certainly the occasion for the Pheneas story coming up. Now, the Bavli is fascinating. What does the Bavli say about the story of Pheneas? And this will end. This is an exit. Rav Chisda said, if someone enraged by witnessing a transgression perpetrated, this is our editorial edition, comes to consult the court how to react, they do not instruct him. That is, okay, here you have how the rabbis understand zealotry. Zealotry, a zealous person is a person who acts on the moment. If you've reflected, if you have a question, you are no longer a zealot. Zealotry is not an act of reflection. It's actually, it lacks all reflection. It's jumping into the moment. It's the inability to contain yourself because of what you're seeing. Moreover, the rabbi said, had Zimri separated from the Midianite woman and Pheneas had slain him thereafter, Pheneas would have been executed on account of murdering him. It's only at the moment of transgression. A minute later, you're a murderer. Had Zimri turned over and slain Pheneas, he would not have been executed, seeing as Pheneas was a rodef, a pursuer. Now, this is fascinating. What do we learn from this? We learn from this something very important on how the rabbis understand the moment of zealotry. And I would propose the following. The zealot is the person who acts because he sees an incident that threatens the collapse of the order. But by the very fact that he sees this moment, the zealot places himself outside the order. When he places himself outside of the order, he is no longer protected by the order. He's exposed. If Zimri turns and kills him, he's operating within his rights. That's an amazing statement. And it focuses the zealot, the moment of zealotry, at a very, very specific moment of acting outside of the order to ensure its endurance. But the person who's there is outside of the order too. Pheneas is no less outside of the order than, in a certain sense, Zimri is, but yet Zimri is, on the rabbinic understanding, at the most transgressing a negative commandment, and therefore not worthy of being executed. So he enjoys the protection of the law. That's an amazing statement. So you see a very complex relationship that the Bavli has towards the zealot moment. It wants to retain the concept as an operative concept, but wants to focus it on a very specific interaction. A very, very specific interaction. So I think there's a lot to learn from it, because on this understanding, the zealot is not a prototype. Whereas Pheneas is maybe a foundational myth for a certain form of priestly cult, in the rabbis it becomes something that has to do with the order of halakha per se, but also circumscribed, very specific way. I think I've said enough. Let's talk.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Sure.
So, please, thoughts, comments, questions.
Good. You run it, Effie. You run it. I'll.
We'll do it this way, okay? So we'll start with Oded, Tirza, Safrir, Danny.
Thank you, man. So while you were speaking, I was thinking all the time of Korach as well.
Right.
So basically, I see it as you describe it. Korach is exactly the opposite, because it's exactly the opposite, because everything is in order. Basically, God is conducting everything and so on. And I wanted to, how do you reflect to Korach? I mean, is that right? I mean, is that the correct reading? I'm reading Korach, and it should be read in opposite. And another one, a zealot moment, I thought about the sons of Aaron. Is that, I mean, they are punished on that. They're going, they want to be closer, and then they're punished.
Okay, we have here, these are two different episodes.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, let's begin with the Sons of Aaron. Sons of Aaron, I think, is fascinating and does have to do a lot with what we spoke, but not for the reasons that you said, I think, because the interesting thing in the ritual of sanctifying the tabernacle, the Mishkan, of Hakdashat Mishkan. The interesting thing is that there's no incense, ein ktoret. And what happens is that they decide, they suddenly have Nadav and Avihu suddenly think, wait a second, the most important part of the ritual is not here. And they take the pan that is meant to be for the incense, and they can't control the fire. The fire consumes them. Now, what you'll see now, how do I know that this is the story? Because you see that the cult of Yom Kippur is based on the Yemei Miluyim. It's a reenactment, because what happens in the cult of the Day of Atonement is that the temple undergoes a restart. But at the heart of the restart is a controllable ktoret. So actually, here you see in the priestly tradition an understanding that the incense is the trickiest moment of the priestly cult. The point where the high priest is most exposed. I read it that way, and I think it has a lot to do with the question between incest and blood in the ritual and how they're structured. But this is the direction I would go. With regard to Korach, first of all, Korach, I think, is the rebellion of the Levites against the Mosaic family. It's exactly what they say. You guys, Moses and Aaron, you've created a family business, and you've left us all out of it. That's their claim. And what happens is, that's why crucial to that story is the ordeal. The ordeal will determine who is the chosen priest. So there, I think you have the ordeal model operating, and it's different from the anti-ritual model which is operating here. But of course, all these stories are typologically connected with each other, because they all have to do with understanding the transition to priestly leadership and whether this is possible or not. That's the direction I would go.
First of all, thank you very much. There's a lot to come out of this. I just want to say some tiny points, just about what you said in the end, and maybe you'll explain it differently. I'd be very happy to hear, but the idea of going out of the order and having mirrored by shalom, I think is very interesting. Because if you kind of trying to rearrange what the order is, maybe so.
I agree with you completely. I think that one of the ways to read the sugya in Sanhedrin is to see it as a enlarging of the reflection of Briti Shalom. And what I didn't get into, and I think is fascinating to do with this sugya, is to look at the tension between the halakha and the agadah. Look how the halakha is trying to control the zealot moment, and the agadah is completely sexually out of control. Completely. In the best rabbinic faction, because one of the things that is so typical of rabbinic agadah is the grotesque. Now, the grotesque is an enlargement of the sexual moment, which is appealing to the readers who are going to enjoy this text. I mean, they're really going to like it. Now, that's the moment you see that people like Maimonides and Nachmanides and the Rishonim can't take the grotesque moment in the rabbis, which the Zohar celebrates. The Zohar does whatever it wants with the grotesque, but the relation between the circumscribing of the moment of zealotry on the one hand to the grotesque agadita on the other hand, I think is the key to understanding the deeper tensions. And in many ways what happens in Talmudic sugyot, they become a reenactment of the biblical myth on a completely different level. So there you go.
I was completely convinced by your reading.
What's your name?
My name is Tzafrir.
Tzafrir, okay.
I was completely convinced by your reading of the biblical text as ritual violence, and I think this is why the Talmudic text is trying to limit the biblical text, because the model of ritual violence does not work when you're trying to read the text as a legal text. The framework of understanding violence or justifying violence, these are two different frameworks, and you can't, or you have to limit the biblical text in order to read it as a legal text, and this is what the Talmudic reading is trying to do.
I would put it a little bit different, Safir. I think what the rabbis are doing, that the rabbis understand perfectly how undermining this story is as ritual violence. And what they're trying to do is to contain it in order to enable, in order to enable them to create halakha as an undertaking. Now, but this is a very paradoxical place, because when you're aware of that, you are placed outside of the norm at that moment. Your reflective moment is outside of the norm. And you have to make a decision on how you're navigating it. It's like Supreme Courts like to tell themselves a story that they are acting in the legal and not in the political. Of course, because that's their language of legitimacy. But that's a very weak story to tell if you're a political theorist, a sociologist, or a citizen. So I think it's got to be, these moments have to be navigated a bit more carefully. It's very interesting. It's at these moments that you have to look at look at Maimonides' Mishneh Torah and look how he navigates these moments, because he plays both ends against the middle constantly. You can't codify the entire law without standing outside it. And yet you have to hide it when you're writing. It's exactly this, that you can't allow that to surface. So I see the Talmudic sugya, perhaps a good way of looking at the tension between the grotesque Haggadah, the very circumscribed notion of zealotry, is exactly trying to navigate that on the level of the organizing of the sugya.
Yeah, but the problem is that the biblical text doesn't even recognize that there is a legal case here.
Oh yeah, no, it's because its discourse isn't legal. Its discourse is priestly and cultic. Absolutely, absolutely. On that level, yes.
I just would like to point out another way of reading this text.
What's your name?
Naomi.
Naomi.
Another way of reading this text is to take away from the sexuality, and because you could also read Vayachel ha'am liznot el benot Moab, with znut doesn't have to be prostitution. It can also be straying or going towards their values. And then I know it ruins everything, but I think it is a possible reading of that, because it doesn't have to necessarily, be that. I mean, you have the same problem in Hosea also, where what is a zonah and all of that, plus but it fits in very nicely with what you're saying, with the whole idea of the sacrifice. When you get to the Vayakrev, which is because it doesn't say, you translate it as copulate. I don't know what's JP.
No, that's Vayavo. I did Vayavo as copulate, but you're right. Vayakrev. Right. Et Midianit.
Now, if we're in the sacrificial mode, Vayakrev, you have the Vayakrev there, and then what you really have is, instead of, and then it supports the rabbinic idea that it's unconscionable what Pinchas does, because by going, he's misunderstanding the whole thing. There has not been a sexual act. There has been a ritual sin being done of associating what? No, both, of course. No, but you could also. I'm not trying to take away from the normal way we understand the text, but on the level that you are also suggesting that there's a ritual. If you take out the prostitution from there and the sex, and then what he does is that he goes into the core of their beings, and then he creates a sacrifice of them, which then I think the rabbis could pick up as an unconscionable act. So I think
we're neighbors in the Jerusalem neighborhood. We used to share. Menachem moved away, but we're still connected. Over the years, Menachem has listened to my musings on my own research, carefully acknowledged it, and I also had the privilege to hear him teach more than once in various opportunities. It was therefore fitting to ask Menachem to come today and speak to us about the traditions about Pinchas the Zealot and the topic of sanctioning religious violence in one of the most important texts that stand at the core of the three Abrahamic religions. And at this, I turn you to the topic that we're going to engage during this year, the issue of violence, its justification, and its rejection within the three Abrahamic traditions. Professor Menachem Lorberbaum is Vice Dean of Humanities and Professor of Jewish Philosophy at Tel Aviv University. He has chaired the Graduate School of Philosophy in the Department of Jewish Philosophy at Tel Aviv University, and was the founding chair of the Department of Hebrew Culture Studies from 2004 to 2008. Professor Lorberbaum is also a founding member of the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, where he has headed the Beit Midrash program for many years. He also completed his PhD at the Hebrew University, and then spent 3 years at the School of Social Science and the Institute of Advanced Studies at Princeton. He was also Ellie and Herbert D. Katz Distinguished Fellow and Erica Strauss Teaching Fellow in 2017 at the Herbert D. Katz Center of Advanced Judaic Studies at the University of Pennsylvania. He's the author of Politics and the Limits of Law, that came out with Stanford in 2001 and in Hebrew in 2006. And he's also the author of We Are Dazzled by His Beauty, that came out in Hebrew in Yad Ben Tzvi in 2011. Together with Professors Michael Wiltzer of Princeton and Noam Zohar of Bar Ilan University, he's a senior editor of the Jewish Political Tradition, part of the handout that you have before you. Series, Volume 1 is Authority, Yale University Press 2000. Volume 2 is Membership in 2003, and Volume 3, Community, that came out just a year and a half ago, again with Yale University Press. He's the editor of the new and first collection of papers, a new and complete Hebrew translation of Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan at Shalem from 2009, a Hebrew collection of papers in political philosophy, Leviathan in the Holy Land, which has been accepted for publication at Yediot Achronot Publishers and is forthcoming. He's also published 3 volumes of Hebrew verse, and is together with Dr. Michal Govrin, the editor of Dvarim, poetry series at the Carmel Publishing House, and he's published his book of translations of English poetry, Transpositions. we discussed when we were coming here from Jerusalem his new books, one about the traditions of Chassidut and the position of the Baal Shem Tov within that, and his new book on the two very important figures of Maimonides and Nachmanides and how their traditions are in very interesting dialogue in medieval Jewish tradition. And with this, I turn you over to Professor Menachem Lorberbaum, who will be discussing today the incident of Pinchas the Zealot.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Thank you for that very generous introduction, Effie. Thank you for inviting me, and it's wonderful to be here and to see you all. I'd like to discuss the very disturbing biblical story of Pinchas in the Book of Numbers, and the way the Bavli approaches it in Tractate Sanhedrin, what it tries to do with the story, or recast the story in its own fashion. And what I propose to do is to read and analyze the biblical text and the rabbinic text, and I feel free to stop me. I'll talk until someone stops me. So we can turn it into a discussion, because it's worthy of a discussion. Now, in terms of background, what interested me, this is, I think anyone who encounters this story is puzzled by it and tries to decipher what is going on here, and my own approach has been from, maybe I'll say something about my own work. I was trained in what we call today political theory. I did a lot of work in that, but I was never happy with the way it was done in the 1980s, in the background in which I was trained, and the questions of what are the cultural settings of the political, what make the political possible, what legitimates it, were always been sitting kind of at the background of my own work. Hence, for example, the translation of Leviathan was part of trying to understand that, and how one creates a language in which or a discourse in which forms of politics become possible. And as I said, it's an interesting game between what conditions the political, makes it both possible and necessary from a certain point on, and then we're caught in a web. And looking at how these webs are created interests me very much. And this particular story has to do with what we might call foundational violence, the kind of interest that people like René Girard and Burkhardt have looked at, and others. This question, the haunting moments in both our polities and our religions that are saturated with blood. And in that sense, that's what I mean by disturbing. And here, the story becomes an even more complex one, because the interplay is that of the fundamental work of acculturation, namely of both sexuality and violence, and almost what you might say at a peak encounter, which is highly energized, highly innervated, and placed in a very important place in the Bible, basically as a foundational myth of priesthood, or at least one of the possibilities. of priesthood as they appear in the book of Numbers. Now, the story begins against an interesting background. It's placed in the book of Numbers against the background of the Balaam story of Balaam. Now, the story of the prophet Balaam is a very interesting one, also because Balaam is I would suggest is erected as a persona in the biblical story as the anti-prophet to Moses. I think the rabbis understood that also or something like that when you encounter the Mishnah in Tractate Avot that speaks about the students of Abraham on the one hand and the students of Balaam on the other hand. This idea of Balaam as someone who knows God's mind, Yodea Dat Elyon. He's intimate with God and yet has a very complex relationship with God. And the interesting thing is that actually when you read the rabbinic renderings of the personality of Balaam, you see how guarded the biblical text is. The biblical text is very careful about not demonizing Balaam. It's in classic biblical style. It's letting the story unfold and forcing the reader to take a position with regard to this. So is he wicked? Is he corrupted? Is he naive? How are we to understand his personality? It's left quite enigmatic. And interestingly, in Humanities' commentary on the Torah, there are two versions in the text about his typifying Balaam's grade of prophecy. It's unclear if whether the Ramban thought that Balaam is prophesizes through a speculum that shines, a specularia mira, or whether the correct version should be a speculum that doesn't shine. Now, if it's a speculum that shines, then he is indeed of the same stature as Moses. So Moshe. So this is very quizzical and puzzling, and needs unfolding. But all this is the background, because it's against this background and the failure of the curses against Israel. If you remember, Balaam is hired by Balak, the king of Moab, in order to curse Israel, and the project fails. It collapses. Actually, the exact opposite happens. Balaam is guided by the divine word to bless Israel, and but at the end of the episode, at the end of this, we have this very strange episode of the Pheneas story. So let's turn to it now against that background of the anti-prophecy of Balaam, and see what is constructed and erected here in this episode. Now, I'll read a verse in Hebrew and then the English, and a good way of going about it is first to reflect on whether we accept the translation to English, which in this case is New JPS, which we used. The text before you is taken from the third volume of the Jewish political tradition, and we work regularly with the New JPS, but under the understanding that we edit it as as we see fit. So we weren't aggressive editors, but we tweaked the text when we thought it was correct for our purposes in the book. Now, Vayeshev Yisrael Bashittim, this is chapter 25 of Numbers, verse 1. Vayachel ha'am liznot el benot Moav. While Israel was staying at Shittim, the people profaned themselves by whoring with the Moabite women. Now, I'm not sure about profaned. I would translate here embarked, began. I think Vayachel is like Hebrew kmo Vayatchilu and not Chilel, because the root Chet Lamed Lamed Chalol, which is typical of the Book of Holiness in Leviticus and of Ezekiel, is very text specific. You won't find it in the priestly writings at all, or other biblical writings, and and usually it retains the two lamedim, right? V'lo techaleluhu or vayachel. So I'm not sure. I don't think it's about profaning. In any case, I wouldn't translate it as profaning. If you want to go in that direction, I would say desecrate. If you want to go, if you want to translate it that powerfully, the verb. Okay, so they desecrated themselves by whoring with the Moabite women. Now, which shows us that I think, like the rabbis understood, and I think that this is a reading that is cultivated by the text itself, I think, is that to suggest that although the curse didn't work on the macro level, it did have a residue. And the story in front of us is a residue of a failed attempt or for a much general cursing of Israel, but we have a very disturbing and problematic episode. ותקרנה לעם לזבחי אלוהיהן, ויאכל לעם וישתחוו לאלוהיהן. These Moabite women invited the people to the sacrifices for their God. The people partook of them and worshipped their God. So what we have here is a dramatic moment of worshiping the Moabite deities, and as we'll soon see, this turns into a festive occasion of sexual liberty. ויצמד ישראל לבעל פאור, וייחר אף אדוני בישראל. Thus, Israel attached itself to Baal Peor. This is the deity in question. And the Lord was incensed with Israel. Now, what exactly Baal Peor is, and what exactly the form of worship is a fascinating story unto itself. It's interesting that the rabbis understood that the worship of Baal Peor is defecating in front of the deity, and as with many of the rabbinic exegetic movements with this story here, I'm not sure that the rabbinic appropriation is an adequate reflection of the biblical text, as it's a reappropriation of it for rabbinic purposes, and I think this is on many different levels, as I will try to argue maybe later on. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe. And the Lord said to Moses, "Kach et kol rashi ha'am vehoka otam l'Adonai neged hashamesh v'yashov charon af Adonai miYisrael." Take all the ringleaders. Now, this is a very narrow translation. Rashei Ha'am means the leaders of the people, and there's no reason to, I think, to give a necessarily narrow reading of this verse. Vehokaotam, and have them publicly impaled. Yes, this is I think a good translation, and a very powerful one. Very here you see what will only develop in the text, a very zealous form of violence, and you see already that there's the sexuality and the violence are already operating here, one with the other. They're moving with one with the other, even though we don't yet have a way of understanding the encoding of the movement between them. Hokai is a relatively scarce verb in the Bible, but we have it in other important places in the Bible where really impaling is which means a public act of killing. That this is it turns into what Foucault will call a spectacle. Hoka is a killing that is a spectacle. V'yashov Charon neged hashemesh, publicly, that is in front of the sun, right, to the light of the sun. So that the Lord's wrath may turn away from Israel. And here you see also how the moment of impalement is understood as having an atoning element to it. God's wrath is quieted by the enactment of the impaling. And this structure, I think, is crucially important. It's crucially important. What has to be deciphered is exactly this kind of triangular relationship between sexuality, impalement, and what turns out to be a sacrificial mode of impalement, which is one that brings about atonement. It's this structure that is crucially important, and I find astounding to see how vibrant and vital it is in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It's there. It's always there to be called upon if you want to use it. It's a model that's there to be used if someone chooses to. There's something very basic about it. So part of it is understanding the relationship itself, and secondly, to understand how it functions foundationally. These are the enigmatic moments that I think have to be uncovered and better understood, and it becomes, I think, what is crucial to state. I think this is, if I look at people like Gerald and Burkhardt that I mentioned before, and you can add Freud to this in his own way also, is that what I think, what I take from them is that although these are very dramatic episodes that seem to be singular as moments, but they are foundational to the very acculturation that creates the possibility of normativity in these three religions. And this is it's with this idea in mind that I'm digging here. Now, one of the reasons that I think that we have to read this as that Rashei Ha'am, the heads of the people, are not merely the ringleaders, is because of how I understand the Book of Numbers generally. One of the, I'll say this very shortly because this is worthy of a discussion in and of itself. The Book of Numbers is one of the quizzical books of the Pentateuch, because Genesis has a very clear narrative structure. So does Exodus. The book of Leviticus is very clear in its two major parts of the priestly code and the holiness code, and Deuteronomy is more or less discursively quite stable. But Numbers seems to be a very eclectic book, a collection of stories that we don't understand what they're about. And my take on Numbers is whereas the book of Exodus shows us how Moses builds the foundation of his power. He moves from being the between God and the people to become the leader of the people, which nominally is still in the middle there. But if you remember, after the golden calf, God says, look, Panay elechu v'anichoti lach, my face will go, and I leave this up to you. Now Moses says to him, listen, if your face doesn't come with us, that is, if you don't turn your face to us, then I'm not doing this job. But actually what happens is that Moses sends the Levites out to kill, remember, all those who worshipped the golden calf, and that actually becomes the moment where Moses becomes the leader of the people. Now, interestingly, in the episode of feeding the people in Numbers 11 and 12, what happens there is that Moses, using exactly the language he used in Sinai to get his position, he uses it in the opposite way to say, I can't take this any longer. Did I give birth to the people? To these people? Have I been impregnated with them? Did I give birth to them? That you say unto me, carry him on your bosom. Now, this is a wonderful statement, because the word omen doesn't exist in Hebrew. You can only be an omenet. Only a female can suckle and nurse a child. But Moses sees himself also as a mother figure. I'm nursing these people. What do you want from me? I can't take this any longer. And if this is what you do to me, kill me. I don't want to have to do any more with this. Now, this is a dramatic moment. And I think that what we see in the book of Numbers is the slow and very persistent falling apart of the Mosaic theocracy. Everyone rebels against Moses. His brother and sister, the Levites, the princes of the people, everyone rebels against Moses. The story of Numbers is the most profound rejection of theocracy in the Bible. That makes the book of Deuteronomy necessary. And Deuteronomy, like the book of Samuel, will propose a king. Right? So actually, the same move from Numbers to Deuteronomy is actually the same move you have in the move between the book of Judges to 1 Samuel 8 and the creation of the kings. It's the same structure, because it's an untenable model, yet it's one of the most powerful models in biblical, theological, political imagination. So when we achieve this episode here, we're meeting Balaam as Moses' nemesis, because Moses doesn't have a nemesis within the people, but Balaam is, but he's not strong enough. He's not, if you want, his magic isn't powerful enough to counter that of Moses. Think about the wonderful rabbinic and quite early and pre-rabbinic legends about Moses' power. It's against this background that I think we have to read what's going on here. Now, Moses turns to I return here to Numbers. Vayomer Moshe el Shoftei Yisrael. Moses says to the judges of Israel. This is a wonderful statement also because if you think about what I said before of that transition between the book of Judges, Shoftim, to the book of Kings, and read the word Shoftei Yisrael here with that in mind, you see how it resonates with an entire biblical discourse that is always reflecting on the question of what is the correct theological political formula for Israel. So Moses says to the judge of Israel, and this is a replay, kill, each one of you kill the people who attach themselves to Baal Peor. This is a replay of Moses' call to the Levites in Exodus 32, right? 31 and 32. So Moses attempts to retain the power, to go back. There's been an undermining of the divine cult by the heads of the people turning against the Lord and to Baal Peor. We see the heads of the people, Rashi Am on the one hand, Shoftei Israel, the judges of Israel on the other. We have no idea who these people are because never before have they been mentioned in this way in the Torah. So this is a first. We don't even know who's against who really here. But we see that this is a civil war, if you want to say that, between two different parts of leadership in the people, and it turns around Baal Peor, the Moabite tradition, versus the Israelite God of the Tetragrammaton. And we're posed with that. And suddenly we come with the episode that hopes to be the game changer in this story. V'hinei ish mibnei Israel. And here comes then just one of the Israelites. This is a terrible translation because ish is critical here. Ish means a person that is, I would argue, a leader. This is one of Rashi Am. This is one of the heads of the people. This is a persona. Ish mibnei Israel.
No, it also resonates the first encounter of Moses as a violent person.
Wonderful, wonderful. Efi Maxim. Vayakrev elechav et Midianit, and brought a Midianite woman over to his companion. Again, a terrible translation because it's the Midianite, ha-Midianit, right? That is someone who they know exactly who they're talking about. Over to his companions, or to his colleagues, or to his comrades. Le'einei Moshe u'le'einei kol adat b'nei Israel, in the sight of Moses and the whole of the Israelite community, that is publicly. Vehem ha'bochim petach ol moed, who are weeping. I would say, I would render it, who thereupon wept at the entrance to the tent of meeting. So you see what he does here. He goes to the tent of meeting, and now we see that this is an act of ritual copulation. Okay, that is, this person of Israel, who is not mentioned by name, but he is a persona. What he does is, he actually tries to do, in many ways, I would argue, what Balaam didn't succeed in doing. Rather than encounter Moses and try to play power against power, he is proposing what I will call an anti-ritual. What is the anti-ritual? An anti-ritual is an attempt to weaken the God of Israel. Rather than to sustain him by an act of sacrifice, to weaken him by an act of copulation that is meant to be theurgically weakening towards the deity. This is an anti-ritual. Now, The question of anti-rituals in the Pentateuch is a fascinating one. One of the prices of looking at the Pentateuchal sacrificial cult from the point of view of the later temple centralizing of the sacrificial ritual is to miss the constant reflection throughout the Pentateuch on what is a sacrificial ritual. And there are many, many different versions and many different understandings of what it's meant to do. The Akedah story of Isaac is one model. What Abraham does is another model. Cain and Abel are a different story. Now think about incorporating anti-ritual in the Bible, like the scapegoat to Azazel in the Yom Kippur atonement process. There you have a wonderful, what could have been an anti-ritual that is completely taken over by the priestly ritual and imported in order to try to control it. As, again, I mentioned Nachmanides before. Nachmanides, I think, rightfully understands that this is what the story is about. Let's try to control this. I think that the ordeal of the Sotah, of the wayward woman in Book of Numbers, is also a kind of anti-ritual. But we have to think about these different models and how they work. Another interesting episode is to think about Elijah in the Mount of Carmel, which the rabbis are interested in the question of how do you go against the law? That's not the interesting question. That throws us away from the real question, and that's how Elijah decides to work like one of the ancients and to confront God and say, God, this is your moment. You're either with me or you're leaving me alone. It's your Baal. Remember the episode here of Baal 2. So remember, don't the reception history of the Bible is so old, is so multi-layered, that part of learning to read the Bible is constantly to peel the layers of the reception history in order to understand both the power of the original text and the dramatic power of its reception history itself. I'm not saying this to debunk the tradition. I'm saying that we can't listen to what the tradition is trying to do if we don't historicize it properly. So we return here and we've got a dramatic moment of anti-ritual, right? So, and you see how beautifully it also is completely resonant, completely consonant with what I described as the deterioration of the Mosaic leadership. What does Moses do? He cries. That's not what a leader is supposed to do. When leaders begin to cry and have nothing to do, that's when Pheneas walk into the story. It's exactly at that moment. And here comes the next part of the episode, which, if we thought we've seen everything already up to this point, the best is yet to come, or best. That was it. Vayar Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen. He saw, as the rabbis say, Ma ra'a ve'asa. Niskar halacha, the Gemara says, right? He saw. That is, he read the situation. He saw what's happening. He recognized correctly the vacuum of leadership. This is where he steps in. Vayar Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen. Now, listen, his entire yichus comes with him, right? His entire genealogy.